Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. And for the first time in a long time, we are coming to you with our post-game episode. And we are here in Beaver Stadium alongside the new press box digs, which brought us to the opposite side of the stadium on the east side. Gave us a chance to check out a nice sunset as this game came to a close. And also just good to be back here with 106,000+ in Beaver Stadium to watch the Nittany Lions start off their season with a 46-11 victory over Nevada. My colleague here, Daniel Gallen, informed me as the game was coming to a close. This is the first college football game ever to end in that score, so saw something pretty unique today. We also saw signs of positive growth from the Penn State pass attack and really a standout performance from Denai Dennis Sutton to get his senior year going. A lot of directions we're going to go in, but to start out, Daniel, 1-0. This is a game that they started out 27-3 in the first half. Penn State scored on its first 9 possessions, and ultimately Nevada didn't find the end zone until the final minute. As James Franklin said, there's a lot that they want to get cleaned up. There's some areas of particular importance to kind of iron out, but overall, this kind of went to plan. Many of you may have lost some money because they didn't cover that 44-point spread, and I think you and I had them covering that just barely. They didn't quite get to that point, but this one is very much looked like you thought it might when we led up to the game.
I think that if you're James Franklin, this is a great result in terms of you got in, you accomplished some things on the field, you showed some different things, but when you turn on the tape, there's going to be a lot of things to look at. It's very easy to get, I think, caught up in settling for 4 field goals, including twice after really sudden change plays on a kick return and interception return that set you up in the Nevada red zone, and you come away with 6 points instead of 14 there. So I think that if you look at things, a lot of good things. Nevada didn't really let the offense do a lot. The defense was rotating in a lot of different guys, trying some different things out. And so that when you get to turn on the tape, on Sunday, James Franklin is going to be able to point to so many different things for a lot of different players. And then when they come out against FIU next week, those things are going to be, the expectation is those things will be improved upon.
Yeah, there's a lot to discuss coming out of this matchup. Our first look at Penn State in game work since we were down in South Florida in January for the Orange Bowl. And obviously a big topic of conversation in the last 7.5 months since then have been, are receivers going to step up and make more plays? Of course, they didn't make any plays against Notre Dame. We got a good answer early on. Of course, we're working off of an opponent that's 3-10 Nevada. That was a 6-touchdown underdog, but you can only play who you got in front of you, and the results, you got to like them for Penn State at receiver. Kyron Hudson, 6 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown. He was the leading receiver, 89 yards from a yardage standpoint. And then Trevor Pena actually had the most catches for this team, 7 of them for 74 yards on the day. He got down to the 1-yard line later in the game where Nick Singleton punched it in, but he almost had himself a score as well. And as we were setting up to record, our colleague Mark Brennan sent us this stat along. No Penn State wide receiver had made 6 or more catches in a game since way back in that blowout win, early November 2023 at Maryland. That was Dante Cephas's really only memorable matchup as a Penn State player. Caught a couple touchdowns there. He had 6 catches that day. And then Keandre Lambert-Smith had 8 receptions that day in College Park. They played a few more games that season. They played an entire 16-game schedule last year. No receiver got to 6 catches. We had 2 of them do it today, Daniel, and they happen to be the 2 guys that we have had circled for a while. All due respect to Devontae Ross, but this preseason camp with Ross a bit limited, maybe taking some more time than them in the regular season to get on a roll. This was great early returns from the 2 guys that we've had pegged as probably the most important additional pieces to this roster from the offseason.
I think the biggest thing about what Pena and Hudson did today wasn't necessarily just the statistics, even though if you're a Penn State fan and the last time you saw this team, wide receivers had 0 catches against Notre Dame, but it was how they did it. I think with Pena, you saw good examples of that short area quickness and how he's able to move, how he's able to create separation, what he can do when he gets the ball in his hands. And that was kind of his calling card coming in after his career at Syracuse. With Hudson, you saw a little bit, he was kind of pigeonholed as that like contested catch guy, move the chains. But we saw Drew Aller look to him downfield. He had that sliding 31-yard touchdown catch at the end of the second quarter. But then he's got that, toe tap along the left sideline in the third quarter for a 14-yard gain. He looked really steady. Aller looked to him early and often. 7 of his first 8 targets in the game were to Pena and Hudson. 16 of his 26 attempts overall in the game went to Pena and Hudson. So I think to see them go out, get open, display the things that we hope they did or that they did at their previous schools, and then maybe add a little bit more in there too. I think coming away with it, you feel very good about them. Obviously, we can put that big asterisk. That's Nevada. It's a Mountain West team that was basically playing not to get beat by Nick Singleton in the run game and Katron Allen or over the top by Aller. So it was a whole lot of intermediate stuff. And we know that we've seen wide receivers have big opening games, the past 2 years against West Virginia. But I think that what you saw today, given the uncertainty, given the questions that you had, a huge positive for Penn State. Came in muted, Tyler.
You mentioned some big recent opening games, and you're kind of referencing Harrison Wallace, I think, in both cases against West Virginia.
And
by the way,
Keandre, 2 years ago.
Against West Virginia here at home. I just want to side note here. I know this is kind of a night when a lot of fans, or if you're hearing this Sunday morning, you feel like you want to celebrate the new receivers and spike the football at the old receivers. Well, let's give a quick tip of the cap while we're on the subject of Harrison Wallace. At latest glance at the Ole Miss Georgia State box score on Saturday night, Harrison Wallace at 5 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown in his Ole Miss debut. So we'll see what it looks like for him, but clearly a change of scenery was probably best for both parties. And Trevor Pena, former captain at Syracuse, Kyron Hudson, former captain at USC. They both had family in the stands today. And I had a chance to go up to both of them in our post-game access. And I tell you what, both those guys just taking in the setting, taking in the surroundings of Beaver Stadium, getting that applause as a result of some of their performances. I think it was a great welcome to the family moment. I know they were here in April for the blue-white game. I know they've been involved in different Nittany Lions events throughout the offseason and NIL events and stuff like that.
Pena wasn't here in April. So this was
right. I should say, Kyron Hudson had a nice day for himself back in April. But for Trevor Pena, he wasn't in pads until late July, early August with this football squad. And I think for him and Kyron Hudson, they both gave some credit to Drew Aller, because we got to give a lot of credit to the receivers for bringing themselves up to speed and putting in the necessary work. But both of them said that Drew Aller was very proactive in making sure when they got to campus, and in Pena's case, he knew he had a short period of time to really bring himself up to speed. He just said the off-field stuff, getting together with Drew Aller in social settings, but also in film settings, extra side sessions, a bunch of extra work is what they described. And they felt like they had that trust and confidence in place. And as we kind of trend this discussion over to QB1, Daniel, it was very clear that he was comfortable, he was confident looking in their direction. And we've said it throughout last year about where's the disconnect between Drew Aller and his wide receivers. And I think a big part of it, really the last couple of years, has been just maybe an unwillingness to pull that trigger when there's a contested window, or when you're working within maybe a tight margins of error, because you maybe have some trust issues with your receiver. I'm not putting words in Drew's mouth, but seems like that has dissipated right now based on early results. And we want to see the tight ends more involved, I think. And James Franklin referenced that he wants them to get more involved early. But today was about seeing that rapport between Drew Aller and these new receiver pieces, and trying to project that forward and seeing what that might look like against Oregon, against Ohio State in December and January. They got to keep stacking these opportunities and proving it to themselves and proving it to the world. But again, if you're looking for a start that you can wrap your arms around and say, this is what we were hoping for all offseason, this really was that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's different things that you can quibble about with Aller's performance. He took a sack at one point. There were a couple times where he tucked it and ran when you weren't necessarily sure if there was something downfield that he could have had. I know that I'm going to be interested to see when we get those PFF numbers on Sunday, what his average depth of target is, because I know that there's going to be some people that wanted to see the deep ball. We've heard so much about Drew Aller's arm strength and everything like that, but we still didn't see those big throws. I think the longest completion that he had today would have been the 31-yarder for the touchdown. And so you didn't see him go vertical a whole lot, but the way that Nevada was playing them, it was really a take what the defense is giving you. And I think that that's what we've come to expect from Aller over the course of his career. I do think, though, in certain situations, you really see him kind of step into that really decisive, willing to force it, willing to fit into the tight window. You talk about that, the 4th and 2, the play right before the 31-yard touchdown pass to Kyron Hudson. He rifled that ball to Devontae Ross for a 4-yard gain. I think you're the one that compared it to it was like a second baseman turning two.
When you got to make a real quick throw, and that's what it looked like.
Yeah, he just zipped it right there, and Ross made a great catch away from his body with his hands. And I think that every once in a while we see Aller do something like that. I just think back to that Indiana game 2 years ago when it was just back against the wall. You have to chuck it deep. You have to throw it vertical, and they made something happen. And I think that, if you're watching this Penn State team, you want to see more vertical shots. Like you want to see that aspect of the offense. And there's probably going to be games that it's going to have to happen. Their hand will get forced. But I think that just Aller's strength is just knowing what is going on, knowing what the limitations are, not like his personal limitations, but what limitations the defense is putting on them for them to work through. So I just think that for Penn State and in this situation, he played a really good game. I think that there's still going to be enough on tape to improve on and to look at, and for Andy Kotelnicki and Danny O'Brien to go over with him. But I think that Aller in game 1, this is the guy that's supposed to be leading you to a national championship. This is the guy who could be the first quarterback drafted next spring. This is a guy who, is on those Heisman odds boards if things go a certain way. I think that this was a very nice game 1 from someone with all those expectations and all that hype around him.
And you'll notice quarterbacks carry a lot of hype throughout off seasons. Sometimes the wheels fall off early. Sometimes game 1 you get a little exposed.
Were you watching another game today, Tyler?
It was a different kind of matchup that we were watching earlier in the game, certainly between 2 top 5 teams. But yeah, I think that as much as you can say he's taking the next steps and he has these new receivers, if he went out today and he looked a little disheveled in terms of how he was in executing this team, executing this offense, if he looked a little out of sorts on a day like this, we probably would have chalked it up as, they're building rapport. He's getting on the same page with his receivers. But I think to see him really in command with these new pieces, getting a ton of extended work, you're also working in a new tight end with Luke, not a new tight end, but Luke Reynolds in a more prominent role than we've ever seen him before. So you've got all these different pieces around Drew Aller. And again, I think the command was really what I go back to on this day. Completed 85% of his passes. He had 4 incompletions. I think the most glaring incompletion was probably that he throws it behind Kyron Hudson in the end zone. Hudson could have had 2 touchdowns on the day, maybe a bigger stat sheet. But ultimately, that was really the only one where I think, you really want that throw back. And I think with Aller on the day, there weren't any really he didn't open the door. And that's what you want to see from your senior quarterback. He never opened the door at any point for Nevada to feel like it had some momentum. And overall, I think that both sides of the ball did a nice job in avoiding those kind of lapses that can open the door for a team to feel good about itself when you want to beat them down and kind of take their soul out of the contest like this. But overall, I think with Drew Aller, and by the way, we got some looks at Grunkemeyer today. I think the continuity with Andy Kotelnicki is something that we're all curious about, because the bridge between year 1 and year 2 with Mike Yurcich was not pretty. I mean, Mike Yurcich didn't survive year 2 with Drew Aller as a starting quarterback. With Andy Kotelnicki, we've heard a lot about the launch pad that people feel is in place because they've had this offseason to build on. And Kotelnicki's talked about how it's kind of a collaborative effort in some regards because he carries that kind of respect for Drew Aller and putting together game plans and trying to figure out how they want to attack defense and where they feel like their strong suits are. And so to me, this kind of checks off that box where when you see a QB kind of exuding that confidence and again, that command, I think that's a direct tie to the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach, and Danny O'Brien, who he's also building that continuity with. And I think James Franklin referenced as much during his post-game press conference as well.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to hear Aller talk about being in year 2 with Kotelnicki and everything that comes along with that. Kotelnicki said at the beginning of August that they want to be really collaborative when they're putting together the game plan. And Aller, talked about that, and he talks about how they're in sync and that Kotelnicki has a really good feel where, okay, right here we're going to go tempo. This thing is working for us right now, and it's something that Aller is usually feeling. So I think that is something that we saw today. where it really felt like that, they had a counter sort of for everything that Nevada did, except for, the two short fields where they had to settle for field goals. Those two possessions just felt a little disjointed in there. But I think Aller just seemed really on the same page, really moving well. There are a couple interesting quotes from Aller and Franklin that referenced last year. I know that this team, it's all about 2025, 1-0, everything, but fans have long memories. We have long memories, and it came up a little bit. And Franklin had a comment about the way that Nevada was playing them, to not allow Nick Singleton and Katron Allen to beat them. Franklin said, quote, "Last year that would happen sometimes, and we weren't able to distribute the ball enough, and we were able to do that today." I think about that makes me think about the number of targets that both Hudson and Pena were able to get, along with a couple other guys. Aller had a quote where he was talking about being in year 2 with Andy Kotelnicki. He said, quote, "I think last year maybe we still had questions going into the year of what we really wanted to be or who we could really rely on, but I don't think we really have had those thoughts or issues this year." That one felt a little bit telling to me. And then he also said that someone asked him about his command at the line of scrimmage, because it looked like he was changing the play a lot, and he said that when they do that, they call 2 plays in the huddle. They get up to the line. He has the option to kill, and he said week 1, 2025 compared to week 1, 2024, they have a whole bunch more of that in the playbook, which that one makes sense, just given being in year 2, having the memory with the system now. But I did think that those other quotes from Franklin and Aller were a little bit revealing, a little bit of a glimpse inside the mindset they have, for the, I guess the faith they have in these guys, and how well everyone has been able to get on the same page.
Yeah, the turnover in the passing game, I don't think a lot of people internally are surprised by what happened on the field today. A lot of us have just been like, we got to see it on the field. We didn't see any 11-on-11 action during preseason camp. And we really didn't see much of one-on-one work even between wide receivers and defensive backs. But I caught up with Nittany Sutton on this subject after the game about the passing game and seeing wide receivers making plays consistently throughout. And he perked up. I think that was about as excited he was to answer any of the questions about himself, because he had a dominant day, and we'll get to that. But Nittany Sutton called it amazing. He said it wasn't a surprise because he saw these receivers make plays going back to spring camp. But he said to see it happen on game days makes him really excited to see what's next for the offense. And I think that's worth acknowledging. This defense that was playing at a top 10 level last year, they had to watch a lot of less than stellar moments from plays that were potentially there to be made downfield that didn't happen. And so you'd imagine this is kind of a bit of a sigh of relief for the whole group to see it transpire on game day. And they got a little proof out on the field right now. And Daniel, when we look at Ethan Grunkemeyer very quickly, he got a nice series in, 94-yard touchdown drive, 7 of 9 passing on the game for 86 yards. Ultimately, he's a guy that was QB2 today, but James Franklin did not promise that he'll be QB2 next Saturday or in October or November. But I got to say, he didn't hurt his case today, which is probably a good start for Grunkemeyer. And, didn't turn the ball over. Nothing really egregious that we could notice. I'm sure there's some things that they're going to pick him apart and from a coaching staff perspective to work on. But I'll tell you what, from up here, looked pretty good. And when you go 94 yards down the end zone and you're doing it with a bunch of, young players and backup pieces, I don't care who you're going up against. You've got to execute. You got to get it done. This was his real first chance to do that at this level, and he did.
Yeah, I thought Grunkemeyer looked really solid out there. And the fact that he was able to lead that long touchdown drive, I think that validates some of the coaching staff's faith in him. Because I feel like we've seen it before in the past, even sometimes when Bo Prevula would get into games where they would take Aller out, the second teamers would go in, and then suddenly things would just grind to a halt. And it would, things would just be 3 and out, or incompletions, just very disjointed. And I think today, that group, they weren't able to convert a 4th down late, and there were, it's a lot of backups. There's a lot of guys, true freshmen, redshirt freshmen, getting their first real action. But I thought Grunkemeyer looked like he belonged out there. I will admit, I'm gonna have to go back and watch that drive again. I was doing some writing, doing some organizing, getting ready for post game at that point in the game. But he had that one pass that I think you pointed out as something where he put it exactly where it needed to be. It was to Tyseer Denmark, where I think he was running downfield, came back, Grunkemeyer threw it to him out of the break, really low, and Denmark was able to go down, scoop it up. One thing I will say, just as an aside, Tysier Denmark, I think the way that I would describe him is enthusiastic, where just watching him run around the field, he had maybe the longest 1-yard punt return you'll see, and he just looked really enthusiastic to be out there, really vocal on the sideline. You could see some personality out there, which I think that is interesting, because he's someone that we want to see more of. I think we thought we would have seen more of by this point in his career, but to see him have good chemistry with Grunkemeyer on something like that, I think that's a positive. But yeah, I like what we saw from Grunkemeyer. It's not really your normal second string situation when you have Cooper Cousins and TJ Shanahan on the line in front of you at guard. But he looked like he belonged out there. And I think that's something we saw maybe why he won the job. We heard a lot about consistency. If you're going to lead a 15-play, 94-yard drive, you're going to have to be consistent.
Yeah, I like the ball placement. I like the way he kept his team or his unit on time. Sometimes you can tell that the time is slipping away from younger quarterbacks who haven't done it in front of a crowd and with a real opponent across from them. So I would say overall, he passed this first test, and we'll see if he's QB2 next week, or if they take a look at Smolik and what that might look like moving forward. But again, another blowout opportunity against Florida International next Saturday. And when we talk about the offense overall, I think James Franklin referenced it. We'll talk about it this week, I'm sure. The run game was not dominant today, and part of that was the way that Nevada schemed up. This was a situation where they wanted to make Penn State make some plays through the air, and James Franklin said, defenses did that to them last year, and they couldn't always come up with answers on the perimeter. We saw that time and time again, especially when the competition increased. And Franklin said today they were able to get those answers. Singleton scored a couple touchdowns. He's now, I think, tied for second all-time in program history for total touchdowns, Lydell Mitchell. And then you look at Katron Allen, kind of a classic touchdown run for him, 12 yards, a little bit of patience, sees the sliver of daylight created by Venga Ioane's blocking, and just bursts through a few defenders on his way, and then kicks down the door with his touchdown celebration. But Katron, 8 carries, 43 yards. Nick Singleton, 8 carries, 19 yards. Singleton added 37 yards on 4 receptions. There's going to be busier days for these running backs. There's going to be bigger days for these running backs. But I think James Franklin was more telling us that he thinks the offensive line, as they start to get maybe their cohesiveness down and as they start to get in their better rhythm, he thinks there's a lot of room for growth there. He talked about some of their outside zone run schemes. He thinks there's a lot more to gain from those than what we saw today. And part of me wonders, how much is this just going to be trial and error of Phil Trautwein throwing a lot against the wall in some of these games where, you're not always going to have the same 5 setups. We saw 7 offensive linemen on the field like we thought we might. We saw guys moving around. Anthony Donko played a little bit of right tackle. I think we saw TJ Shanahan at both guard spots. Cooper Cousins was on the move. Venga Ioane was lining up out wide. And so there was a lot happening. And I think this is probably the biggest challenge. We didn't think it was going to be like Joe Moore Award worthy week 1. But I think what we thought is when you got 7, 8 guys you think are maybe starters, and I mentioned maybe 8 because Javen Williams is someone who's been brought to that conversation. He's been banged up in preseason camp. But when you've got this depth, you got to figure out what the mixing and matching that's good, the mixing and matching that's not so good. And then you just got to make sure you're hammering the nuts and bolts of what you want to accomplish as an offensive line. So I think with all the moving parts right now, I'm kind of holding off on judging the offensive line until Phil Trautwein maybe settles into what he wants to do. But James Franklin referenced it in his press conference, and I think people watching, you want to see a little bit more dominance from this run game. When it's time to take over, go do that. But today, wasn't necessarily necessary, but I think that there's steps to be made moving forward. And again, part of me wonders how much of that is finding the right 5, kind of rolling with them for as long as you can. And that may never be the plan, but I think that's going to be kind of part of the process.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that we're in a little bit of a wait and see with the running game and this offensive line finding some of that cohesion. I think my big takeaway, Katron Allen looks really good.
Mm-hmm.
Like even before that touchdown run, he had some really, really nice plays. That patience, that agility, you can tell that he can be a little bit more of a agile runner at this point in his career. I know that he was really cast as the physical presence when he first got to Penn State a couple years ago, but just watching how he's transformed his body, transformed his play a little bit. He's healthy. I think that really shows with Singleton. Like, you can still see the juice. I mean, he still is that guy where it's anytime he touches the ball, he can take it the whole way. His stat line, not the most impressive when you get down to it, with those, where is it? 8 carries, 19
6
yards.
yards. 6 yards is his longest run today, and that's very non-Singleton like.
Yeah, and I think part of it, I mean, just a tiny part of it, it doesn't change too much if you take it away. If you have 2 1-yard touchdown runs, that it hurts the average a little bit. I know that the body of work outside of that probably left a little bit to be desired, but it's just a small thing, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think you look at this offensive line, and it felt like that Penn State was trying different things out. I think we saw that first series. They had 2 snaps with 6 offensive linemen, 2 snaps with 7 offensive linemen, and they were getting ready to do a 3rd snap with 7 offensive linemen before that Singleton touchdown got affirmed on review. So you saw the different combinations. You saw different guys rotating in. You saw Anthony Donka at right guard, right tackle, like you said. And I think that even though all these guys, except for TJ Shanahan, were here last year, I think that you've got someone like Donka coming off injury that might have a little bit of rust. You've got someone like Rucci who didn't play next to Donka at all last year. Like, there's all these little things that might seem minor, but you still got to work them out. You still got to go out there on Saturdays, see what works, see what doesn't, adjust. So I'm excited to see what this running game will look like next week, now that they have this film to go off of, real Penn State versus not Penn State to go off of.
I'm not spotting any red flags here. I'm not having a conversation this early in the season. I'm just saying let's see what this offensive line comes up with. Let's see what Phil Trautwein can do. And I know people kind of viewing this stage as preseason-ish, in the NFL preseason, these 3 games. I think for me, it kind of is that way for the offensive line, where you just want to throw a lot at the wall, see what sticks, see what's got to get tucked away that you're not going to use for the rest of the year. But I think overall, better days lie ahead for this offensive line. And really, they didn't need to line up and run the ball down Nevada's throat. If they needed to, if they decided to play that way, probably could have gotten that done. I don't think that would have been a big deal for this team, but they were able to do it in different ways. The passing game was very effective. And twice Penn State got inside the 10 thanks to some plays that set them up. One was Zane Durant intercepting a pass after Xavier Gilliam applied some pressure, and that was 2 really talented playmakers at defensive tackle making an impact there. And later on, Penn State gets the ball. What were they, inside the 5 at another point?
They were at the 1 at one point,
right? Sorry,
they're at the 1 after the Durant play, and then
they have a bad snap or kind of a misconnected snap from Dawkins to Drew Aller. It's a big loss. You got to send out Ryan Barker for a field goal. He hit 4 of those field goals today. And then there was another situation later in this game, and for some reason I'm forgetting how they got in that situation.
King Mack kicked 73-yard.
73-yard. Yeah.
They scored the
King Mack. Yes,
they scored the touchdown after the second denied Dennis Sutton forced fumble. You're talking about the second quarter. King Mack returns it all the way to the Nevada 18. They only get 7 yards, have to settle for Ryan Barker's second field goal of the game.
Yeah, so 2 times they're on the doorstep there. James Franklin said, that's an area you want to finish drives, but he also said it was really good to see the field goal unit. He actually made a joke that he told Andy Kotelnicki, to call plays not to get in the end zone so he could get the field goal unit some work. But
that's kind of like dark comedy when you think about some of the adventures they had early the past 2 years in terms of the field goal operation. So honestly, that's what popped into my head when they keep sending Ryan Barker out there. And I know it was because the offense was having some issues, but I was kind of like, hey, to me, it was like, let's double check on Ryan Barker, what we had last year based on how they started the past 2 years, and Barker passed those tests.
Yeah, former walk-on, took over the starting job early October last year, kicked a game winner against USC, I think, in his first start, and then obviously did pretty good with that role the rest of the way, starts strong. None of those kicks were from 40 or beyond, but 4 for 4 is 4 for 4 from a field goal kicker. And so let's get over to defense now and then some topics we got to hit on before we wrap up this show, because denied Dennis Sutton, we easily could have led the show with him, but after investing the time we did in the transfer receiver conversation on this podcast for the last 7 months, we had to go in that direction. But denied Dennis Sutton. I know Abdul Carter was on the field as a guest today. He's no longer a Nittany Lion. He'll make his NFL regular season debut soon with the New York Giants and All-American. And I think people wondered, what would denied Dennis Sutton look like without that across from him? Would it still look like Penn State had an elite level All-American type defensive end? Today it did. Today, it looked exactly like the denied Dennis Sutton we saw on the field in South Florida in January, where he was outstanding against Notre Dame, came away with an athletic interception, was bullying guys in the backfield. He really had a fantastic playoff run. He showed you everything about why he was a 5-star. He's, the guy I picked to be the top NFL draft pick from this roster. And so Dennis Sutton today, man, he was wreaking havoc and he was letting opponents hear it. He was bringing the energy. He had a sack. He had 2.5 tackles for loss. 2 forced fumbles that led to points for Penn State. James Franklin referenced it was the first time that Penn State players forced 2 fumbles, and some dude named Micah Parsons did it. And so I'll tell you what, hearing from the Dennis Sutton after the game, and by the way, I brought up his pinned tweet. I said, I just double-checked. You got this tweet still pinned from 2002 that you're going to be the best – 2022. Yeah, he wasn't that early on. In 2022, before he got to campus, though, this is like spring of his high school senior year, and he tweeted, I will be the best defensive end in college football, pinned it to the top of his X account, Twitter account, whatever we're calling it, and it's still there. I said, why is it there, and are you getting there? And he said, it's a constant reminder to him that's the goal he set. He thinks he has everything in his arsenal to be that kind of player right now. And I think, he's not going to tell you he's there just yet, but step by step, he had a fantastic offseason, trimmed a little bit of weight, did not lose any power, has gotten even more athletic. And he's just dialed in. I mean, he is a different kind of guy. He's not kind of a rah-rah guy when we get him, off the field and interview sessions, but you see it after every single play. He is shouting. He is energetic. He is setting a tone. And I think Zane Durant told me after this game, he said it's contagious for the rest of this defense. When Denai is rolling like that and he's, making the body language is exuding confidence, he said other guys are picking up that and they want to make a play off that. And so if they're going to get this version of denied Dennis Sutton, which I think we can start to be more comfortable with, this is who denied Dennis Sutton has become, then this is a true top-of-the-line defensive end who can challenge for a lot of awards and individual accolades, and perhaps more importantly, set a huge example for this young group of pups in that edge rusher spot who, starting to get their training wheels underneath them today. Chaz Coleman, Jalen Harvey, Malachi Williams, and denied Dennis Sutton said he understands he's got a responsibility to bring that group along with him. Zariah Fisher, we talked about it, kind of finished out August, bumps and bruises situation. He was out today. So it was denied Dennis Sutton and a bunch of young dudes who haven't done anything in games. So really, really good tone-setting performance for this defense and individually for a guy that, he could really soar up the NFL draft stock conversation as we work our way through this season.
I think today is the type of performance that you wanted to see out of denied Dennis Sutton, because it feels unfair to refer to someone who is a former 5-star recruit, has started a bunch of games, who closed last year playing the best football of his career, and to call him a question mark. But coming to the year, you looked losing Abdul Carter, looking at losing Smith Vilbert, Amin Vanover, Zariah Fisher not playing a ton of football over the past couple of years, and then today not being active. You look at denied Dennis Sutton, and it was pretty much like, you're really gonna have to step up. Like, if Penn State, if this defense gets to where it needs to go, it's going to need a dominant, disruptive presence off of the edge, a game wrecker, like we saw Abdul Carter do at different points last year. And denied Dennis Sutton is doing it without that guy on the other side that is probably keeping defensive coordinators up a little bit later at night than you. And so for Dennis Sutton to come out and do that off the rip, I think it makes you feel a lot better about Penn State. I think Dennis Sutton is one of those dudes that is really wired differently in terms of, you talk about those posts. He's had a couple of those. Like, I think he's had best defensive end in college football. I think he's had something about national championships. Like it's, he's someone who puts stuff out there and works towards it. James Franklin said that he's, pretty much obsessed with being great, that it's something that is every day with him. And I think that you're seeing that now. So you talk about it where there's a spotlight for these guys to step into when you talk about Abdul Carter moving on and some of the other big presences that were on defense. And game one, week one, denied Dennis Sutton and also Zane Durant with his interception, they step into that spotlight. They fill that void a little bit. So I came away just, really, when you have an edge rusher like that, it's so much fun to watch and it just changes every single snap out there. So denied Dennis Sutton was definitely a star today.
I think it might have been like best player on the field vibes for me today, just with what he was doing, throwing guys around. I know there were some really strong performances, but it was that kind of day for Deni Dennis Sutton. And if he keeps doing this, again, another edge rusher is going to command serious national attention throughout this season. We'll see what some of the younger players can do alongside him. We'll see if Zariah Fisher can get back healthy. Unfortunately, I think he's now missed 28 of the last 43 Penn State games just because of some health issues. But a lot to like about DDS in game one here. Overall, defensively, Penn State had 9 tackles for loss. 3 sacks. Nevada was trying to do a quick pass game. Deni Dennis Sutton talked about that. 2.5 yards per rush for Nevada on the ground, and overall 203 yards on the day. Penn State mentioned those 3 takeaways. 2 of them came on Nevada's first 2 possessions. James Franklin told us after the game, first time they have forced a turnover on the very first possession of the opponent's game one since 1994, and 94 means a lot around here. And so something to just keep tabs on here moving forward. I think people will be happy if there's a lot of similarities and references to 1994 as this fall goes on. But a big picture beyond Deni Dennis Sutton, who stood out to you on defense today?
I think partly because this was really our first time getting to see him in a Penn State uniform. Amari Campbell, he is the green dot, has the in-helmet communication with Jim Knowles. It looked like everything was getting in. It looked like a smooth operation. But then just the way that he plays, he's a little bit on the smaller side, 6 foot, 230 pounds. Not really, he doesn't necessarily have the same body as like a thumper, but he still played really downhill and played with an edge. I mean, he was finishing guys off, not landing on the pile late, but if a guy's going down and he's in the area, he's going to make sure that guy gets down onto the ground. So I just came away really impressed with how he played. I know that he was at a Power 4 school last year at UNC, but that was not a good defense, not the same talent level that you have at Penn State. And he looked like he belonged out there. He looked like he fit. So I talked to him for a while after the game. I'll have something up on him on Lions 24/7. I talked to Tony Rojas about finally getting to share the field with him as teammates. They're 2 Northern Virginia guys. They knew each other growing up. And he said that, he told Amari Campbell, like, this is what it's going to be like. You're not prepared for what it's going to be like. And Amari Campbell said that, it was everything he could have imagined being on this Penn State defense with 106,000 people out here, all of that. So I came away really impressed with Amari Campbell today.
Yeah, Campbell flashed to me a couple different times. One of them was probably on one of the worst defensive plays overall for Penn State, but he pursued a player downfield. I think it was like a 25, 30-yard game maybe for Nevada, but it could have been longer. It could have potentially been a touchdown. Campbell all of a sudden zooms down and brings down the ball carrier. And speaking of just guys who just seem to be zooming towards the ball today, Aldavian Collins. I mean, that's kind of been his reputation. A guy who is extremely aggressive. I believe Terry Smith said, he'll fight you in a phone booth. He's a guy who is never going to avoid physical contact. And he was really in control more than we thought, Daniel, today of that second cornerback spot. We knew A.J. Harris, a guy who's garnered a lot of praise during the offseason, was going to be a starter. Wondered if it would be Elliott Washington or Aldavian Collins. We didn't think it really mattered who it would be because there'd be more of a rotational approach. Elliott Washington did get out there, but that wasn't really until the second quarter. Certainly seems, based on our first look at this defense, that Aldavian Collins has really come out of preseason camp in a good spot. I think he looked the part today. He's in year 3 with this program, year 4 at the college level. Came over from Mississippi State after taking a red shirt in 2022. So this is a guy that we've heard good things about, but I think we saw a lot of that today. And then sticking at cornerback, just like he did in the blue-white game, when Darius Dixon got involved, I paid attention because he pops guys. He flies around, and you just want to see more of this kid, and you'll get a lot more of him as the season goes on special teams too.
Dixon had maybe the hit of the day on a kickoff return in the second half where he leveled the Nevada kick returner. I think James Franklin brought it up during his post-game news conference. So yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on those two. I'm gonna have to eat some crow to our poster on Lions 24/7 in the in-game thread where I said Collins and Washington the snap counts will probably be even by the end. They might be, but it wasn't when the game was quote unquote in flux or during that real contested part of the game. I think someone else to mention, Xavier Gilliam, he had the pressure that helped on the screen pass that helped force that Zane Durant interception. He's someone that jumped out to me as well on that defense.
Yeah, Alonzo Ford got the start next to Durant. We figured that'd be the case, although Gilliam pushed for a potential first-team role. I don't think it really matters. I think overall, when you look at flash moments from defensive tackle, you're going to get more of those from Gilliam. I think Alonzo Ford is going to do a lot of dirty work that doesn't show up, and you don't necessarily appreciate snap by snap, but he's going to clog up lanes. He's going to help free up other guys. He's going to do his job. Gilliam, though, gives you a little bit more wiggle, a little bit more athleticism, explosiveness, and we saw that on a pass rush there. Former defensive end, former basketball standout who has added a bunch of weight and really come together well as a redshirt freshman. Daniel, looking across the board here, it was nice to see a lot of these new faces, but we also got a chance to see some old faces get back acclimated in game action. Cam Wallace pulled his best Saquon Barkley impersonation, jumped over a defensive player after catching a pass. I thought he ran the ball with authority today when he got a chance. He was the third running back involved. I don't think we quite yet know who RB3 is, but I think Cam Wallace did himself some favors for that competition today. And then on the same series that Cam Wallace gets involved, Andrew Rappelier catches a couple passes, one of which was called back by a penalty, but he was fired up. Classic Rappelier. After every play, I saw him, streaming to the heavens after laying a guy out as a blocker. He is so enthusiastic and passionate. It's something that very obvious all the way from the press box. I can't even hear what he's saying. I can't imagine what he's saying down there, but I can feel the energy coming from him. And so those are two pieces that I think as we get further along into the fall, they're going to be bigger. For a big stretch of this game when it was the primary offense, I noted this to you. I said, it's a lot of Luke Reynolds. It's a lot of Khalil Dinkins. I don't see much of Rappelier, especially running routes out there. He got a lot more run as the game went on, and I think he's got to be feeling a lot better about himself coming out of this matchup. Same for Cam Wallace. And I believe I noted this correctly. That area where Cam Wallace did his jump over a defender was right around the same area of the sideline last year where he got crumpled to the ground, could not get up, very ugly injury, took a long time to recover from. So, kudos to those guys. Football is a physically demanding sport. It can break you sometimes, and sometimes the mental journey back is just as tough as the physical part. So I think they both kind of checked something off the list today that they needed to do.
I think you referred to it as the feel-good drive there
Yes.
when they were both getting going. Yeah, I mean, Wallace, just to be brief, that Wallace injury last year, awful. That was really tough to see. So to see him get back out there and be the first running non-Singleton Allen running back, I think that says a lot. And then he gets the ball in his hand, makes a play like that, no hesitation. Stan Drayton was talking earlier in August about the mental side of things. So I think that bodes really well when you talk about Wallace. With Rappelier, yeah, like you said, when in that first half when he's going through things, he was out there and it was mostly run plays when he was out there. I think you pointed that out. And so you're kind of we saw what he looked like earlier in August. We saw him knock some of that rust off as things went on. So you kind of okay, you are trending up. But then when we didn't really see him involved in the passing game, that kind of stuck out to me. Second half, we look at him, that play that got called back. I mean, he had a nice juke out in the open field, which I don't really think that's Rappelier's game to begin with, even when he was coming out of high school, much less coming off that injury. So I think that shows that he's made some good progress back too.
3 catches for 33 yards. Longest gain was 26. I think if that had stood and without the penalty, he would have been, somewhere around 50 yards maybe with 4 catches. Luke Reynolds, 2 catches, 11 yards. Dinkins got a catch later in the game, 1 catch for 24 yards. There's going to be bigger days for the tight end group. Today, the story is really about the wide receiver. Franklin said get those tight ends involved a little bit more early moving forward. But great to see Rappleyea back in the mix. And that leads you to believe they do have 3 guys they can really rely on at that position moving forward. So, and we'll see what Cam Wallace can do with that RB3 opportunity. I don't think we saw Quentin Martin involved at running back today. Is that correct? Yeah. So we saw a little Corey Smith as well, but that was it. Freshmen were on the field. We mentioned Dixon being involved. Kobe Howard got some work. Ivan Kamaju, Chaz Coleman. For as much as we talked about Chaz Coleman all August, we don't have much to add today. There were some nice moments. Yeah. That he actually was responsible for, I think it was denied Dennis Sutton's sack. I think it was Chaz Coleman who pushed the quarterback out of there. So I'm sure he'll have a lot to learn as he reviews the film. We've heard he is a big-time self-corrector. But, again, Ivan Kamaju also out there as a freshman defensive end. And Owen Alcine got a lot of run as a left tackle today behind Drew Shelton. So just a few pieces. Matthew Parker, a true freshman, got to kick the last extra point. So we will go through things, game snaps, involvement, usage, and all that. We'll have a lot more thorough analysis over at Lions247.com in the hours and days ahead coming out of this matchup. Daniel has a story up on Drew Adler's game 1 performance. I know he's working on something with Amari Campbell. We've got video of James Franklin's entire press conference, including top takeaways from that press conference. And I've got a story up on Saturday night on the transfer receivers and what they did in their first opportunity of the regular season. Daniel, anything else to add? I guess we should note Zion Tracy, questionable coming into the game. We didn't end up seeing him. That meant Kenny Wosley, redshirt freshman, got his first start at the nickel. Tracy's a guy that has been the clear leader at the nickel position for a while. He's also been in the mix at punt returner, where we saw other guys, Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, Tysier Denmark involved today. So just something to keep tabs on there. Egan Boyer was out today. He's a guy that probably would have played at left tackle. Without him, you saw Owen Alcine involved there. But anything else to stack up on top of this, Daniel, before we say goodbye and depart Beaver Stadium?
Nah, I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say on Monday when we get back together. And I'm sure Mark Brennan's going to have a lot to say too.
Yeah, we'll bring in Mark and we'll get back with James Franklin for a Monday press conference in the Beaver Stadium media room. And we roll right into game number 2 week with Florida International ahead next week. But check out all our coverage going into Sunday. We'll have a ton over at Lions247.com. Mark will have his report cards. Again, we'll have our snap counts breakdown, a lot of stories about players and performances from game 1. For Daniel Gallen, I am Tyler Donahue. It's late in Beaver Stadium, but we'll be back again in just a few days. Until then, we'll talk to you real soon right here on the Lions 24/7 podcast.